We now call this meeting to order. If you could please rise if you are able and pay attention to Councilwoman Hiller for the invocation, to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to introduce Reverend Juliet Hempel. She is the senior pastor at St. John African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is at 7th and Topeka. The story quickly of the church is from Alley Barn to the church you see today at 7th and Topeka. It is one of the oldest AME churches in the state of Kansas, having celebrated its 150th anniversary in 2018. St. John's is designated as a city, state, and national historic landmark, and its members, from its very beginning to today, have been recognized and invaluable community leaders. Reverend Hempel came to us in October of 2018 from previous pastorates in Missouri, Washington State, and California. She's active in the church and the community and assisted us with the Brown v. Board's 65th anniversary events this year. Reverend Hempel.
Thank you. May we bow our heads, please? Father God, we come before you this evening giving you glory and praise. We come saying thank you for this day and all that it has brought. We thank you for how you have brought us over highways and byways through dangers seen and unseen. We thank you for watching over our children today and taking them home safely. God, we thank you for this great state and this great country. We come tonight asking God that your presence would be with us, that you would touch our hearts, open our ears and our minds, and Father, help us to come together in one mind and one body. We pray for this city, that you would have your way, that you would help us to be safe, that you would help those, Father God, that have a mind to hurt, harm, kill. Father God, that you would touch them and that you would fill their hearts with love. As we also pray for this country, Father, that you would lead and guide us in the way that you would have us to go. Help us to love each other. Help us to hold each other up. We thank you. Now bless the city council, bless our mayor, bless our officers as they keep our city safe. We give you glory and praise. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We now move on to the roll call.
Mayor De La Isla.
Here.
Council members Hiller.
Here.
Claire.
Here.
Ortiz.
Present.
Emerson. Padilla.
Here.
Jensen.
Here.
Elwood.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
And Lester.
Here.
We now move on to the consent agenda. It has been made, we've been made aware that there was an issue with the minutes. The minutes were not ready for this, so we're going to strike the minutes out of that consent agenda. Yes, Councilwoman Hiller.
Could we pull the governing body meeting schedule out as well, briefly? I'm concerned about the accuracy of everyone understanding that our second week in January is a Monday meeting, not a Tuesday, and that overrides.
Yes, could you repeat that, Councilwoman?
Sure. I wondered if we could pull the governing body meeting schedule just for clarity. I'm not looking at the resolution, but I'm concerned that there would be public confusion and even council confusion about whether we normally meet on Tuesdays, but our statute right now requires that we meet on the second Monday of the month, and that I don't think is included in the special adjustments that we have.
Would it be feasible for us to have a motion in a second and then have discussion about the item so that we could clarify it?
But that can't be done on the consent agenda, that's all.
Okay, so then we have a motion to pull two items. Is that correct, Councilwoman Hiller?
You're pulling the minutes, and then
Yes.
we would be moving the governing body meeting schedule.
Deputy Mayor.
Never mind. Well, I thought this was just to talk about the election days, the 2 election days. Sorry. I thought this was about the 2 election days, is it not?
It is. City
So
manager?
what is your,
Yeah, it relates to the canceling of those two particular meetings, and our current schedule has us meeting January 13th for the new swearing in of the new incoming council members. But that's not reflected. This change in the meeting schedule was basically the canceling of those two meetings.
We perhaps have covered what I wanted. There's a default assumption that we meet the first 3 Tuesdays of every month starting in January with the way this was written, and I wanted to make sure people knew that would not be the case.
Okay, so then, knowing that we have clarified the issue and that we are meeting on Tuesdays as assigned, and this document fixes that, are we okay just removing from the striking the item of the minutes from the consent agenda and then moving forward with it? We don't need a motion for that, correct? Okay, so we have stricken the minutes from the agenda. We have the consent agenda in front of us as amended. Thank you very much. We have a motion by Councilman Jensen. We have a second by Councilman Cohen, right? Any additional discussion on this item? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
Okay, we have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to the action items. Item A, if the clerk would read.
A is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trott declaring the entire boundary of the City of Topeka and rescinding City of Topeka Resolution Number 8963. B is a resolution introduced by Deputy Mayor Sandra Claire canceling governing body meetings for calendar year 2020. C is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trott authorizing initiation of condemnation proceedings to acquire easements for replacement of the Wanamaker sanitary sewer main from the 6300 block of Southwest 9th to Danbury Lane. Minutes have been withdrawn, and there's a list of applications for cereal malt beverage and dance hall license applications, and staff is recommending approval.
We have heard,
That was the consent.
yeah,
We'll vote again on the consent.
okay, we'll vote again on the consent. Thank you. So we have heard again the consent agenda. Thank you so much. We have a second. So again, we proceed by voting. Sorry, we had the discussion and you didn't read it.
Okay, we have 8 yes with Ms. Ortiz not voting.
oh, my goodness, I'm voting.
Is there a yes?
That's a yes.
Vote for me.
All right.
So 8 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to the action items. If the clerk would read item A.
A is an ordinance.
You didn't count me?
We did.
She counted you.
Tony's not here.
Okay, we have 9 yes. A is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout, amending the district map referred to and made a part of the zoning ordinances by Section 1850050 of the Topeka Municipal Code by providing for certain changes in zoning on property located at 921 Southwest 10th Avenue from O&I 2 to Office and Institutional Dwelling District to M2 Multiple Family Dwelling District.
City manager.
Thank you, Mayor. The Planning and Development Director, Bill Finder, will present information related to this zoning change request. Bill?
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Your Honor, council members. The zoning that's before you is a property located in the historic Holiday Park neighborhood. It is just on the edge, actually, of the historic district of Holiday Park, along at the southeast corner of Fillmore and 10th. What they're proposing is a rezoning from the current office zoning, office and institutional, to a residential zoning to allow for 2 or 3 family dwelling conversion. The current property has a long-standing house on it. It had been used for office purposes in the past. In fact, most recently, it was used illegally for a commercial business, which this developer or this owner is converting to residential. The Planning Commission did recommend approval. This is in perfect compliance with our neighborhood plan, which for the area, which calls for office or residential or a little higher intensity residential. We did have public comments at both our meeting, Planning Commission hearing and neighborhood meeting, concerns again about what's going on there. Is it too much? but the lot itself, when developed, would be limited and constrained by its size, and so it would still have to provide enough parking, and have to go through and have all the codes approved for fire and life safety, and they have to convert it back to residential use. So that will all have to be looked at the time of permit, but no, this is a very similar use to what is along 10th Street in intensity and character. So we do recommend approval, and I'll stand for any questions.
Are there any questions or discussion with regards to this item?
Motion to.
Before we do that, this is an item that requires any disclosure of any ex parte communication. Ex parte communication means that we are going to be able to testify that we have received information either pro or against this item, and that you are still able to make an impartial decision on the matter. If anybody has received ex parte communication that would like to disclose it, this is the time. Seeing none, Councilwoman Hiller.
I did attend the neighborhood level meeting and have had some calls, as one could imagine, from the neighbors, but I don't think that will affect my vote. In fact, I have to compliment the staff because the last ones that I referred over didn't call back, so I assume that's resolved.
Wonderful. Seeing no other individuals that would like to disclose any ex parte communication, at this point in time, Mr. Jensen made a motion for approval. Do we have a second? Councilwoman Hiller seconds. Additional discussion on this item? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item B, if the clerk would read.
B is approval of the Policy and Finance Committee report and recommendation regarding Title IX amendments submitted through the Topeka Human Relations Commission.
Chair Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Really did a lot of thought about trying, if we should try to dramatize this or not, but a lot of people showed up to this committee meeting. There were so many people that they were standing in the hallways. And every single person that came to the microphone says that Topeka does not want this at this time. And so our committee recommends that we send this back to the commission for a review.
Is that a motion?
I don't think a motion is required, is there? For a committee report?
Right. You just receive the committee report, and then you act upon the recommendation.
Okay. Well, thank you for the report. Any discussion on this item from the body? Seeing, yes, Councilwoman Hiller.
Well, if we want to send it back to committee, we do need a motion, correct? Perhaps the chair could elaborate. I think you did a pretty good job in here of identifying what things you would ask the committee to look at. It's important.
Point of clarification, Madam Mayor. We already voted to remand the commission and the committee.
We did do so.
That's why, yeah. So-
Mayor?
Chair,
Yeah,
yes.
Mayor, so there's two separate things here. There's a report and a recommendation. The first step is to receive the report, which doesn't
we have.
require any motion or second or anything. Councilmember Cohen provided the report, and it's been noted in the record that that report's been received. So then the next step is the recommendation, and that recommendation is to refer the matter back to the HRC, as I understand it. Now, that action would need to have a motion and a second, and would need to be voted on. And it will take 6 votes to support the recommendation.
If I could clarify,
Yes, Councilman Jensen.
we already did that, though, at the committee level. So we didn't bring that motion's not come to the council. So I'm not understanding why the motion is necessary here. Because are we invalidating the action of the committee?
No, Councilmember Jensen, it's just like any other committee action that goes to committee. You all consider it, and then your recommendation in this particular instance is not to take an action to approve recommendations or changes to Title IX or to keep them the same, but it is to refer it back. And I think that takes the entire body to say, yes, we all agree to refer that matter
So-
back to the HRC.
You're saying the committee was not authorized to remand it to back to the Human Relations Commission.
No, it was referred, the matter was referred to you all as a committee, has to come back to the body.
I see, okay. So for future committees, you don't have the authority to remand something without the council's approval.
Correct.
Which is fine, but we need to clarify that rule because it wasn't well clarified in the meeting.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just like to know, what are the stipulations of remanding it back for the public? I mean, we're remanding it back, why? What do we want them to look at?
Mayor, I'll go ahead and comment on that. This Human Relations Commission was asking to be an authoritative body where they can investigate complaints at the business level, and then fine businesses for violations. And this is about forcing businesses to have hiring practices that would give benefits to those in the LGBT community and that community. And every person that came said that Topeka doesn't want this, and if we wanted this, we would move to California. So that's essentially where the meeting ended. Once again, the room was completely full with people standing in the hallway, and nobody spoke out in favor of it. Nobody from the commission came to speak out in favor of it. Every comment was against it.
Thank you.
Does that clarify?
Yes, thank you.
Deputy Mayor. Oh, pardon me, Councilwoman Ortiz, you were not done?
No, so I guess we're asking the committee to relook at this? Is that?
Human Relations Commission.
Right. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Deputy Mayor.
Councilman Cohen, so, and I watched that, and I think a lot of people said we didn't have this problem. They haven't experienced this, right? In Topeka.
Mayor, that's correct. We also asked them, how many complaints do you have right now? And there aren't any.
Right.
And essentially, it's a problem looking for a solution, or the solution looking for the problem, or whatever that is. There's no need to have this right now. We don't have this problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
I would add another quick comment. Part of the struggle with what was presented was that there was some language that wasn't as clear as it possibly could be about how this would be implemented, where, what issue it's trying to identify and solve, which is part of the problem, is that it was a good first stab for what they're trying to accomplish, but it just needed some additional clarity to try and better describe the situation, which was part of the reason why there were so many folks there to talk about it. It was very broad in the way it appeared to look. So part of what we'd asked for was some clarification. Some specific language was fairly vague in what it might or might not cover. There was some additional clarity that really could be hammered out there. So that was part of the reason why we had sent it back, was to ask for, more information, more clarity as to where this is occurring in the community now, if it is, and that sort of thing.
Okay. Councilwoman Hiller.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I was trying to lead for the last two sentences in your report that said there were unanswered questions about what level of enforcement or control the Human Relations Commission was requesting, and then and also it mentioned associated budgetary impact related to requested changes. So I drew out of that was probably what you thought the charge should be to go back to the committee, if that language, pulling that language out would help.
Okay. Additional discussion on this item? We have a motion and a second to remand this back to the HRC for further discussion.
I'll give the motion.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilman Cohen, and we have a second by Councilman Jensen on this issue. We've had discussion on this item. A
I'd
vote
like
for
to say
yes.
one more thing.
Yes. Councilman Cohen.
I asked the Human Relations Commission for the minutes of when all this was discussed, and they sent all the minutes but that session. So I'd like to see it. If not, maybe my predecessor would like to see that, or the person that follows me here would like to see that. But yeah, and everything just kind of seemed a little suspicious that, especially when it was such a big deal and a lot of people were there, that when we received the minutes, we received everything except for what we asked for. So, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Cohen. Additional comments or discussions on this item before we proceed with the vote? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item C, if the clerk would read.
C is approval of the 2021 Social Services Grant Funding Priorities and Budget Recommendation in the amount of $434,904.
And on this episode of the Chair Cohen Show,
I was like, this is the Jeff show, sorry. We have a budget recommendation for next year, $434,904, and I'd like to make that motion, please.
so we have heard the motion. Do we have a second? We have a second by Councilman Lester. Do we have any comments? Councilman
Madam Mayor,
Jensen.
I would be interested in hearing item D before I'm willing to vote on item C. As you know, we invalidated the entire process for this last year when we overrode it. I'm particularly excited to see that there's an outsourcing recommendation. However, I would like to see the outcome of that before I'm prepared to fund it.
Could we, Councilwoman Heller?
I think it's chicken and egg. I looked at the same thing. I guess I'm thinking the reverse, that we ought to talk about what we want first, if that would impact how or whether we would outsource it. I'm okay either way. I do know that there's far more to discuss about what we want for next year than just the dollars, and so if we're going to do it in sequence.
I would also agree, Mayor. Either way, this dollar amount is going to be spent. So I think we're still safe to approve that, considering item D also.
I have a question.
Councilwoman Heller.
I have a question then. What was the discussion about the senior services programming? There was an extra $40,000 that a majority of the council put into it this year. If those are still included in this package, and/or we don't add money, or make other adjustments very intentionally, the agencies that were funded this year would overall get cut. So was there discussion about that? I didn't see it in the minutes.
Chair Cohen.
Thank you. I think they're already funded for next year, isn't that? City Manager?
City Manager.
Correct, this is for 2021.
I think that has already happened.
The money for the $40,000 that was discussed during the budget timeframe, we're moving forward with funding that for the 2020 year. And having those contracts issued at the same time. And staff through the Finance Department, they'll identify the cuts as we go through the year that will accomplish the ability to fund those at the $40,000 level, the 3 senior centers and the community action. What I would say is that the determination as to whether those particular agencies are funded next year is still yet to be decided. But I think what the committee did is aging or senior type activities is still included as one of the priorities. So the determination by the committee as to whether there should be something additional done, say, to ensure that they always receive funding versus have to compete, would be something that the committee could decide at a later date. But it is in there as a priority, and so they would be eligible for funding and could make application. So I think that you're safe with approving it in this manner and then have a discussion at a later point if there's something that needs to be set aside like we have with the other.
Councilman Lesser.
The only other thing I would point out, which may be a little bit of semantics, and I don't know that it's proper to say that they're going to get cut, that the amount every year is a little bit different.
Right.
They qualify for it, then they go do it. So I don't know if saying that cut is, is necessarily appropriate. I just wanted to clarify that. I think it's semantic. The amount of money may be differently from year to year, but nobody's getting cut. Thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller?
I asked that just because, and I know that, or I imagine that there's still some carryover of just that, the whole structure that we've talked about, which we give it to the committee and we all agree to the rules and so on, then we should support it. And I sense that that's still, the end of that process. Just looking forward, we're talking about 2021 and the issue of maintenance of effort or not. We all knew that the 40,000 this year was in addition, but nonetheless, here we are. I noted that the recommendation was to continue the grandfathering of 2 agencies, which has been debated from time to time. If that were dropped, it would offset the amount in terms of sustaining the amount available overall. And so that was I didn't look like, I did read your minutes, and I didn't see much of the discussion about those sorts of things.
We're not asking for any of the changes like that.
I knew that.
I personally don't like the grandfathering in. I think everybody needs to go after that money and be on an equal playing field. I kind of find that as kind of a corrupt system that, these guys already have a benefit. I have nothing against the agencies. They're definitely a need in this community. But I think, now if we're going to add some more people to the safe list, I don't think the city should be doing that. And I have a few more words on that on item D, so we'll cover that later. Thanks.
Okay. Additional questions on this item? Councilwoman Hiller?
I'm not sure quite how to handle it with people, with the way it's moving, but I'll just throw out then, basically the committee said, leave all the rules exactly the same and the money is how I read it. Having watched this process either from the committee or the council or otherwise for a long time, it seemed to me that there were maybe 5 issues that have come up. And there were some that were requested last year that this year's committee considered, one anyway, that I didn't see either. And I'll just run through them and people could maybe respond. One is that the senior citizen services have come up time and again as sort of an outlier out of the group. And so one option to consider is to, whether it's in outsourcing or keeping it in this pool, is to, especially if it's outsourced, to treat them differently. Some of the agencies at the end of the process this time said, the process really is working fine for us, but the senior citizens agencies, because they're small and often the director has to do everything, it seems like they may struggle a little more with just getting things done than the larger agencies that are more seasoned. And so just looking at that seemed like something we could do either with this item or the next one. The grandfathering has been an issue, and I don't know that I'd use the word you did, but I felt like we should drop it. And that makes a difference in how much money is carrying forward if we would. The emergency versus prevention ratio kind of wore itself out a couple of years ago, but there was early intent to make sure that there was a balance. And so I wondered about reinstating a ratio recommendation, which we had for years, probably going with 15% and 85% and a 5% leeway is the way we had done it before, just to make sure we had the message in there. Also, one of the things that really caused some changes over recent years was allowing new programs to come in and sort of giving an advantage to an existing agency. I always felt like a new program, the brand new programs didn't need that money right away. That if we define new programs as ones that had 3 years history with them, but also 3 years history with anyone, and there's been a staff interpretation that they would be treated differently if it was a program that was proposed from outside the existing funded group. I think they should all be treated the same. And so that wouldn't make a difference to the agencies right now, but continuing to add them has made a difference in terms of money that was available to sustain programs. The suggestion that came forward from last year formally in the committee minutes, and it's come up before, was to add budget as one of the rating items. Basically showing total agency, showing all sources that come into the agency, as well as other sources for the program under consideration. That is normal in funding considerations, and they could be rated. I've got a couple of thoughts down for the rating. You look at what the economy is, what's reasonable, and also on the availability of other sources. So I could see that if, for instance, people wanted to sustain at least enough for the agencies that have been funded before and leave the senior citizens in, if the grandfathering was dropped, if we added $5,000, it would be the same amount for those that were already funded. So those were the thoughts that I had.
Councilman Jensen?
I guess my concern is that we're again using a process that we've invalidated publicly, that we've proven does not work. And here we are again, we're going to do the same exact process with no changes other than to discuss possibly outsourcing it.
Deputy Mayor, then Councilwoman Hiller.
Just discussed here?
Well, the issue is, I had questions about that.
Councilwoman Hiller,
Oh, sorry.
I gave the floor to Deputy
sorry.
Mayor and then Councilwoman Hiller.
I'm sorry.
Why are we talking about the process?
Because it doesn't work.
But why,
Okay.
that is not on
Councilman
the
Jensen,
agenda.
order.
We're just talking about funding this amount.
So we
So
heard,
point of order, really.
Deputy Mayor, Councilwoman Hiller, and then we'll come back to the chair and to and Councilman Jensen.
I think it does matter, and Committee Chair Cohen knows that I asked staff what the expectation was, because it wasn't clear when it came forward whether I thought that in considering outsourcing, we were going to consider whether to take our process and just ask somebody else to do it, or whether we were going to ask them what their process was and see if there was a better mousetrap out there. The staff advised me that the intent was to use our exact process, but ask somebody else to do it. If that's not true, we ought to talk about that too.
Chair Cohen, to be followed by Councilman Jensen.
Councilwoman Hiller, it's best to my understanding, we're going to continue. The thing is, again, we're discussing item D again.
Correct.
Let's stop talking about this and vote on C, and then we can talk about D, okay?
Absolutely.
Good enough for me.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. That was a motion by Councilman, it was Chair Cohen that made the motion, and it was seconded by Councilman Jensen. We have the numbers in front of us. This is solely the approval of the amount of money that will be allocated in the second part of the discussion, which is the item D that's upcoming. It's going to get into the discussion that we're having right now with regards to the process. So therefore, a vote for yes would be to solidify the amount of dollars that will be allocated for next year's social service grants. You proceed with voting.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes, the motion passes. We now proceed to item D, if the clerk would read.
D is approval of the recommendation from the Social Services Grant Committee to outsource the City of Topeka's Social Services Grant Program to a third party.
And in the last episode of Chair Cohen's show,
And Mayor, I'm so sorry.
no need to apologize.
Okay. I think maybe we should just go right back to Councilwoman Hiller and pick
Absolutely.
up where we left off, okay?
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you. I just was trying to understand what the committee's recommendation was. I know, for what it's worth, that all of the details about the priorities are listed in the recommendation for item B, not item C, or C, not D. So whenever it's appropriate to deal with them, they were part of the first one.
And I will, before we go into further comment, I'm recognizing Councilman Lesser to be after. I will say this. I think that being part of the first ever ECD team, I can say that it was a very difficult process, and this is for those who are both watching and for those that know the story and then for those that don't. There was a point in time in our life in which this council used to stay up till like 1 or 2 in the morning the night that we had presentations by the nonprofit organizations. These nonprofit organizations, which are invaluable to our community, absolutely invaluable, every single one. Let's make sure that I repeat that again. Every single one does an invaluable job in serving our community and filling a gap that government cannot fill. So therefore, what used to happen was that it became a very politicized process. Why, you may ask? Because a lot of the board members of those nonprofit organizations, once they figured out that the organization was not receiving any funding, would start exerting pressure on the council members and stating that we supported you, so therefore you must support my nonprofit organization. And it was a very difficult process because whereas the council body wanted to make the right determination to use the funds that are, again, and I've repeated this over and over again, and I don't think that we give credit to the city of Topeka, the funds that we allocate to give to social service grants are funds that most municipalities in this nation do not set aside. Let me repeat that again. Most municipalities in the nation do not set aside funding for social services because they focus on the basics of infrastructure, public safety, neighborhood development. However, we are a very giving community, and that is reflected in the values of us setting apart these funds. And it doesn't make it correct or incorrect. What has been a very disheartening process has been the process of the body saying, this was a very difficult way to handle this. We were managing these funds. The council was very tired. It became a very political process. Why don't we establish a measurement process that goes into committee, collaborating with staff to ensure that every dollar that is given is a dollar that has been weighted and that has been proven worthy of receiving. And how do you determine that? Not that any nonprofit is not good enough, but you do so by taking a look at what you said that you were going to do with these dollars, demonstrating that you followed up with what you said that you were going to do with these dollars, that you were being fiscally responsible by sending your reports on time, because we have staff members in the audience that have to look at those reports, have to make sure that they're documenting them, because a lot of the grants that we're giving out are grants that we are receiving as a city, that we are giving back, that we're accountable to the federal government, right? So we have these very few issues, but then what ended up happening was that once we instituted the process, as you have heard from the frustration in the members of this body, is that because after we evaluated and established the budget, and we told people for years, this is going to change. You may not get the money. It's going to be okay. We want to make sure that we are not the organization that cuts your money and cuts your program. So we want to make sure that you have other funding sources. It still is occurring till this day, which is where we're at today, that organizations that were not competitive for one reason or another, whether it was for 1 point or 2 points or whatever the situation, were not able to obtain the funds that they desired, and then the pressure started happening again. And I think that that is the frustration that you see in the council members that have chaired the committee this year, that I think that in the end, we all want the same thing. We want these nonprofits to be funded. But I think that what we wanted to do was safeguard that the dollars that were being received and allocated based on merit. And it just has not worked out since the inception of the committee. And I'm making sure that I'm sharing all this information, not because one side is good or one side is not. Again, all of these nonprofits are nonprofits that are worthy of our support. Our most vulnerable citizens receive funding from this. So it's important. But I think that the frustration that the body is exhibiting is we're trying to make sure that we're not making our staff lose their time in evaluating these things and working with nonprofit organizations, so that then in the end, once the approvals are made and the committee does the work, we're having to have this conversation ad nauseum. And the sad reality is that if we ever want to depoliticize the process, either the city has to establish priorities that are so strong enough that they attach a nonprofit organization to those priorities based on the needs of the community and say, we're going to fund elderly services, we're going to fund this service, we're going to fund this service, and this is going to be the amount, and say this is what's going to happen with the funds and call it good. or that the city council is going to approve a number and like the suggestion that staff has made is going to outsource it and never look at it again. But that the responsibility then is to approve the number. So at this point in time, I just want to make sure that we're not having discussions that people that are watching right now on the TV or that are sitting there are going, what the heck are they talking about? And why are people so frustrated? Because I think that it's important for us to understand where we're coming from on this item. And it's important that we know this because not every single person on this body agrees on what the right modus is. So I would invite all of us to really dig deep and figure out what we want to do today so that our next governing body does not have to have this conversation again. Councilman Lesser.
Madam Mayor, I think it might be appropriate to request that Sasha come up. Sasha did a really good job of taking all the information that we kind of brought out in the different meetings, balancing it, working with that, and I think this would be a good time for her to come up and maybe outline some of the changes and then answer some of the questions specifically, rather than us committee members trying to do that.
City Manager.
Thank you. Yes, Sasha.
Madam Mayor, governing body members, good evening. Can you say that again? You want me to outline what we discussed in the committee and then answer questions, is that correct?
I think initially, I think it might be just initiating or explaining some of just what the changes are moving forward if we were to approve this. And then I'm sure there'll be some questions that are generated as a result of that.
Okay, so the recommendation that has been presented to you by the Social Services Grant Committee would be to outsource the Social Service Grant Program Administration. The way that we have discussed it and what I believe the committee envisioned for the process would be to retain the part of the process where we establish the funding priorities and the budget recommendation. And that would come to the governing body just as it does now. And then it would be handed off to a third party, just as the mayor described, and they would administer that process and program funding. They would collect the reporting, they would do all of the things that my staff is currently doing, and then provide back to city the information on the reporting. I think that's an important part, and I think it was important to the committee to have the opportunity to hear about, you know, how we're ensuring that those outcomes and outputs that they're saying they're going to do are actually happening. That would be a process that we would have to develop with a vendor. What exactly does that look like? But those are the only two pieces that the committee had envisioned would remain with the Social Service Grants Committee. The entire process to administer those grants would be outsourced to a third party. Apologies that that recommendation wasn't clear in the cover sheet and the materials that was provided to you all. We believe that there will be cost savings. I will state up front that our estimates are just that. They are estimates. We did a estimation of the cost of staff time to the Department of Neighborhood Relations, and that's where that figure of $56,000 came from. We didn't do a time study. We didn't do anything that complicated. We estimated what percent of their time during 2,080 work hours in a year was dedicated to that process, and then calculated the cost based on their pay rate and benefits. So that's where we came up with $56,000. We did not include cost to the finance department, and that was an oversight on my part. They are definitely involved in the process, so the cost would actually be a little higher to the city of Topeka to do this administration internally. The estimate that we've given you for the savings is based on our belief that we can outsource this process for approximately 2 to 5% of your grant total. So we figured, let's use the higher end of it. 5% is what we believe is about the top of what agencies are charging for that outsourcing. I know that the information that you were provided by staff for the Shawnee County outsourcing of that service does not look like 2 to 5%. But we were informed by Community Resources Council and the county that that's a negotiated rate and it's not based on a percentage. So it looks different. But that's where our estimate came from. 5% of your 434,904 is approximately $22,000. So 56 minus 22 is about $34,000, but that's a rough estimate. That's kind of the long and short of what the committee discussed over the course of those meetings. I believe they met 3 or 4 times in addition to their normal process to approve the recommendations on the social service grants. So the minutes from those meetings were attached, and there were 4 meetings at which they discussed all of that information. So, and agreed that the details of that word-for-word conversation are probably not captured in the minutes. You'd have to watch the video to see what was actually said. So, be happy to answer any questions.
Councilman Dobler to be followed by Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Sasha, the 5% comes out of the allocation that the city council makes, is that correct?
That would be my recommendation, but I'm not the finance director.
Okay.
It's typical.
So what does this process look like? If we approve this recommendation tonight, you come back with an ordinance that covers that specifies where the funding comes from and few items like that?
Well, the recommendation would be the funding would come, because this is HUD money, the administration would come from these funds. So then you would take what's left, and that would be what would be allocated. And then the process moving forward with the approval here would be to authorize staff to move forward with seeking those RFPs and doing a selection process. And so then it would come back to staff for the administration part of finding the vendor and turning the stuff over, and turning the process over to the vendor in order to move it forward.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor to be followed by Councilman Jensen.
So what is the purpose and why was this brought up? Was it to save money? Why did?
So staff didn't bring this recommendation to the committee. Councilmember Clear, actually, the chair of the committee brought it up. Staff wholeheartedly supports it. Not only is this a difficult process for the governing body members, this is a very difficult process for my staff. Every year, inevitably, we get fingers pointed at us about all the things that we did wrong in this process. So I wouldn't be sad to see it go.
But if you were the overseer, and what happened this year with the older population, who would then decide that? Would we then go, oh, okay, well, we'll just disregard what they said?
So a big part of the process issue, and again, I'm talking about my opinion and you asked, so I hope I'm allowed to speak freely. I'm not aware of another organization that makes grants that has an appeal process. That's where the problem lies, in my opinion, because we are allowing agencies to appeal their score in the first place. We've created or recreated this political system that makes everyone uncomfortable. So if I were a company or an organization that was applying for the job, I would tell you right up front, I'd remove the appeal process. I don't know of another grant maker that allows appeals.
Chair Cohen wanted to make a remark.
I just wanted to tell Deputy Mayor Clear that I started this conversation, I think, in April. It may have been in March. It was right after we were assigned to the committee. And they said, look, this is a really stressful process for our staff. And I was like, why do we keep doing this? And I don't know if you guys remember, but right after I got on, the Social Service Grant Committee did their process and the recommendations came out and we voted, and I got all this hate, phone calls and emails. How could you not support the Salvation Army? Remember that? And I'm just thinking, you know, how could you? I'm like, gosh, these haters, I had nothing to do with that decision. It was all done at the committee level. I think everything that needs to change is at that committee level. When I was assigned to the committee, I went and talked to one of the previous members of the previous committee, and they said the system was really screwed up, and they had started putting things in motion, I think, over several years to really kind of right the situation. And after I talked to her about that, I went and talked to the staff. I said, why aren't we outsourcing this and take the whole politics off the table? The decision was made but the thing is this process had already started going down this direction before the recommendations were torpedoed by this council. So that's the thing is, I guess we can do whatever we want. Doesn't matter what the committee says. I mean, I think what's frustrating is that we have to trust that committee process. And if we don't, why do we have the committee process? And you said you were on it on the very first committee. I didn't realize, I thought this had been around for quite a while, and it seems to be something rather new. And why are we doing this to ourselves every year? Good grief, maybe we should just consider canceling this entire thing. If we're gonna fund something, maybe give all that money to that one organization or something like that. The thing is whatever we're doing it's painful every year. And the chair comes and says the same thing. This was a tough decision. I mean, of course it is. We do this to ourselves every time. And why do we do this to ourselves every time? I didn't know about the politics, Mayor. Thanks for sharing that. But the same crooked system remains year after year. It's time for a change, Council. Thank you.
Councilman Lesser to be followed by Councilwoman Hiller. And Councilman Jensen after that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The other thing that, I want to point out too on this is what we're simply doing now, or talking about now, is outsourcing this to a third party to take care of the scoring, the process, the everything. We still will maintain the ability to set what the priorities are, to give them what the outline is of what the council's expectations are, for lack of a better term. From sitting on various boards, being in the process or working in the process of various grants, et cetera, over the years, we just have to accept that there is not going to be a perfect process. There just isn't one, while at the same point, as Sasha, does point out, from my experience with multiple boards, there isn't an appeals process. And furthermore, I'm aware of things as small as you submitted your application and it was supposed to be in New Times Roman font, and you submitted in a different font, and it gets kicked out simply because of that. And ball game's over right there. We're one of few of any that still does this. I think it's great. I think, Madam Mayor, you made some very valid points about the importance of all these organizations. And I agree. And the expectation is everybody's going to want an award and everybody's going to want more. It's kind of like Christmas with my kids, you know what I mean? And I get that. I really do. But there again, there's not going to be a perfect process. There's not going to be a perfect expectation. There's not going to be a perfect process. There's not going to be a perfect scoring, model. I think we do the best as we can, and I think there again, what we're talking about is a savings of, roughly $30,000. If it's 5% on the top end, we're going to negotiate that a little bit and see where we can get that number at. And the other piece of that is we'll still control the guidelines of what we are looking for to do that. So, and that's what the committee can still do when they send that process through the RFP to the different entities that are going to be doing that. So let's not get caught up in the scoring. Let's not get caught up in the process of how we're weighting these different organizations. Let's stay on task and on focus with what we're talking about right now, is whether or not we want to outsource that process, set the parameters moving forward. Thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller?
Thank you, Mayor. I think the mayor did a really good job of laying out how we got into this and how that process started. Understand that I'm not opposed to outsourcing, considering doing it differently, but I've been through it enough to know why we did what we did. And the idea in part was that, and Mayor and I didn't even always agree on that, but, you know, to set the scores, set clear enough expectations and scoring, and have the council approve that, which has wobbled a little bit in recent years, so that everybody on the council owned what the priorities were, formally owned it, and what the criteria were, so that they could back up the process when the time came. We needed to further, we set the appeals in. The appeals weren't there in the first year for the very reasons people said. But what we realized is that one of the reasons that had come to council all the time was people felt like they weren't heard. Maybe somebody misunderstood something or whatever. And we added the appeals process back in at the committee level. So if someone felt that their score was wrong or whatever the issue might be, they had an opportunity at the committee level that helped the committee test the process. But also, if there have been a couple of times where the scores were changed as a result of the appeal process. The other thing that's I don't know how it got communicated to the committee this year, but it's actually up to the committee to set the threshold, whether 80% or 85%, and spread the money. And the mayor and I were both involved in that the first couple of years, where we weren't sure how it would come out, and did some adjusting once the ratings were done to make sure that we could hit the minimum threshold, not making grants under 10,000 and so on. There was a committee responsibility there, but then until this year, the council owned that process, knew that people had a structured process, had a chance to appeal if they wanted to at the committee level, not at the council level, and the council backed them. And so some of the other background was that those old processes that had been outsourced, and then when the council tried to take it in or use citizen groups, it got in kind of a rut. You know, it was either going to be just the same amount of money to the same people, or 5% cut across the board, or 5% increase, because the council didn't have a process to actually process the outcomes and so on. And that's where the mayor and I got brought in that first year, because the council decided not to outsource it and try and do it themselves to manage it. So just for a little more background, what I heard from Mike is what I thought I heard from Sasha today in the email exchange that I had just asking questions, which is that the council would still set up the whole process, the priorities and how things would be weighted and processed. So, and that probably is necessary no matter who does it, if we want to do it at all and we want to back the process.
Councilman Jensen.
So I'm particularly excited to see us advance this. This is something that's sort of languished for years. It's very hard work. I believe there are folks out there that can manage that process better than we can. And so our job is to set the criteria that the community tells us they need and to get out of the way. And with that, I will move to approve.
We have a motion by Councilman Jensen, a second by Councilman Vogler. Seeing no, Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. I didn't vote for it then. I'm not going to vote for it now. I think we set up a process. I don't want to see us pay 5%, 1% when we can be spending that on, we need to figure out the process. And I don't want to see us spending that money when we can be giving it to some of our social services. That's how I look at it. Whether it be the senior citizens or whatever. I thought the appeal process was very unique when I sat on it. Karen talked about some numbers that we changed. We changed it because they didn't add up. Let's be real. Did we really give the process enough time to work? let's look at that. I kind of liked going through it to see it, and I liked everybody on the table to work the numbers, but I won't support it, but that's me, coming from number 3.
Councilman Padilla.
Well, I'm the last member of that committee to speak up because I was the dissenting member on that decision by the committee. And I still hold to that when I dissented for the reasons that I believed in. And regardless of what has been said about politicizing or getting pressure, nobody brought any pressure to me. That was my obligation, I felt personally, to advocate for that segment of the community. And I think that's something that we all do as council people, is to advocate for the community in different areas. So that's where my perspective came from when I dissented in the decision of the committee. I didn't ask for anyone, other agency, to have their funding cut. I believe that would have been unfair. But basically what I asked for was consideration for funding if it could be found, and that was specific. I said if, not saying it will be or it must be. I said if, to see if we could afford it. Been fortunate that the city manager has worked hard in being practical about what we can and cannot afford. Early on in the discussions, fellow council committee member had mentioned some issue with some of the numbers as well. So we never did get into that discussion, though, about what should change in those numbers. Never did. That passed on to a discussion about outsourcing. And as Councilmember Lesser said, there is never going to be a process that everyone will be happy with or pleased with. But I do believe that what the city does to help these nonprofits is commendable. And as long as we can afford it, I think we should continue. The process, though, I believe, brings undue scrutiny to the council, where, as it was stated earlier, why would you not support Salvation Army? Well, that's not the case. It's not a matter of not supporting an organization. It's trying to follow a fair way so that what we can support, we can afford. And so jumping from looking at the process and changing it to going to an outsourced organization that can do it and has a history in being able to do it, gives us an opportunity to still set priorities for them and then step back and let that process continue. And so while it probably might surprise people, even though, like I said, I was opposing or opposition vote, I would support this recommendation to outsource. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilwoman Hillard.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 questions for the group, however, that would work. One would be, again, it sounds like the committee didn't hear or explore how those processes work with those other entities, and that the conversation was, no, we're going to tell them exactly how to do it, and they're going to do a special process just for us. And I wondered whether people would consider putting it out and asking them how they do it and how they would what they think would work for us. The second question would be whether people would consider splitting out the senior services in that, I don't know how many people know it. Again, I thought we'd get a little more information, but there's actually a tax mill levy for aging services. And so that $600 and some thousand pool that the Shawnee County Advocacy Council does every year is specifically for aging money. And they're invested in, they know what other sources they have, they know what's going on. A lot of times to do the best job at this, you need to kind of know what's coming and going with government funding trends and private funding trends and things like that to help shift the money around. And we have not had that in our process. But I wonder if people would be willing, as part of that RFP, to if we do it, to have the aging services as an option to either be on their own or part of that whole package, if that makes any sense.
Chair Cohen, to be followed by Councilman Lesser.
So if this passes, what we would be giving is the city manager permission to the city manager to put an RFP out. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Sorry, Mike. I think that the committee, first meeting of the committee, the new Social Service Grant Committee will set those priorities for the entity. I think that's where this discussion is going. It probably needs to happen then.
City Manager.
Councilman Cohen, I agree. I think that's the thing that as we go forward with the RFP, it's one thing to determine who can administer it, but having that committee meet and determine if there are priorities that are going to be what I would call sacred cows. If we're going to create any more of those, we need to know that up front. Otherwise, we can't put forward, the dollar figure that the third party is going to be awarding and going through that process of determining. We need to know those things. And so that, I think, is what the committee needs to do, have a meeting and determine if there are any more what I would call sacred cows, as we already have grandfathered in 2 organizations. Are there other organizations or particular types of service that we want to ensure receive some kind of funding at a minimum? And then if they were to apply and, either they're going to receive the minimum amount that's set aside, or are they going to be in the pool and compete for potentially getting more? And that's a decision they would have to make.
Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There again, good questions, but I want to stay on task, or we'll be here all night going around and around. This is kind of about whether we just outsource it, and then all those other decisions definitely are going to be part of the committee that's going to make those decisions. Sasha did a very good job in a difficult situation, in the sense that, yes, we are going to have those conversations. Our intent as a committee, at least, which is going to change, a little bit. Our intent was, yes, we are going to sit down with those outsourcing entities, have that conversation. We're not going to all of a sudden pass this and then we're going to just, first thing is let's go put RFPs out. No, we're going to have those conversations. What was difficult about doing that, where there again, as I said, Sasha did a good job, was we wanted to stay transparent with those entities that would be bidding and would be looking at doing such. And by sharing too much information, by identifying what they'd said as price-wise, could put some at a competitive disadvantage, could create this exact political animal that we've been talking about all night. And so that's why, at this point in time, the committee didn't say, we went to this entity A and said, can you do this, 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 and this? We wanted to avoid that. But certainly, I think that we would be foolish not to also engage in them in the process of asking, this is part of what you guys do for a living. What suggestions do you have as well to how we do this forward?
And Councilmember Lesser, I agree with what you're saying. We do have to stay on task, but I think that the concern that has been brought up by the members of the council is if we're going to outsource with somebody, we need to make sure that the council is going to figure out a way that we're all going to agree on how we're going to deliver the instructions to the third party, because what will end up happening is that we'll end up paying somebody on top of what we're paying and then invalidate all of the work that they did. And I think that that's the concern that is being brought up, but absolutely well taken. Are we ready for a vote? Councilwoman Hiller, to be followed by Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. I guess if I were one of the people who got the RFP, I'm not hearing clearly what we're going to be asking them to do. And if I were going to give you a bid, it would be different if you were just going to write a check and I was going to put it in a process I'm already doing and do it the same way I always do it with the same people versus a process that has different parameters and a different time frame and things like that. So if it's going to be negotiated by the current committee and it's going to be visits and so on in the next 6 weeks, I just not clear.
Councilwoman Ortiz to be followed by Councilman Lesser, to be followed by Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just would want to make a comment. I hope after it goes to committee, it would come back to the council. Is that correct? For us to look at it and any input? Thank you.
Councilman Lesser and then Sasha.
Mother of God, that's all I was trying to say was it's going to go back to there. It's going to come to us for us to then approve the RFP to go back there. We're not creating the RFP here this evening. We're making the decision whether or not it's going to go back there.
Just a quick point of clarification. The committee's discussion about outsourcing the process included our score sheet, our priorities form. We never discussed, the committee never discussed as a group changing our process. So that was never on the table, or at least that was not my takeaway. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but our package would just be handed off to a vendor to administer.
Deputy Mayor.
Okay, Councilmember Lesser, I agree. This is first step. Let's vote, outsource
Yes.
it or not. Second step, figure that out later. So I call the question.
Okay,
Mother of God.
the question has been called. We proceed with the voting.
We have 7 yes, with Ms. Hiller and Ms. Ortiz voting no.
7 having voting yes, the motion passes. We now move on to item E of the agenda, if the clerk would read.
E is approval of a real estate agreement between Cedar Creek Properties LLC and the City of Topeka in the amount of $290,000.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. As we discussed last week, city staff has conducted a process to determine the best location to place our next fire station. That location is based on a need for a fire station in the Middle West, as I would call it, location along Southeast 6th and Fairlawn area. The location will provide better coverage for a good part, for this part of the community with minimal impact to the other areas of the city. We did this analysis with the assumption that there was no new money available to staff an additional fire station. If that money were available, this discussion regarding closing a station could be discussed, but that would change our recommendation as far as the moving of the current personnel equipment to a new station. Oh, would not, excuse me. I feel the timing now is to complete this project. It was started many years ago to provide better fire protection to our community. Chief Duke is going to review the process that we followed to make this decision and discuss and answer questions that you had last week. Chief Duke?
Madam Mayor, Member Council, we were tasked by the city manager, like he indicated, to revive, I'm going to say, the station out there in the, I'd call it the northwest area. One of the reasons we were doing that was not only has our call load gone up there, but the past studies done by other entities indicated that as well. For the city, that's where we need to start looking at building another fire station. So what we did was we looked at the city as a whole and looked at our response times, see where they came in NFPA 1710 standards, where we fail there, and we wanted to make sure all of the city had equalized response time capabilities from the fire department. The methodology that we used was the response times. We also looked at the historical data and used GIS to indicate what our presumed times would be no matter where we placed the fire station. We also identified other areas that we could improve on time-wise and response times, but this area northwest looked like it was something that we should do, and our data that we accumulated indicated that. We looked at the volume of calls in the areas, we looked at the response times and the occupancy type in that immediate area, which there was a few questions asked from the council, and we answered those questions and given the information that they required. It was the conclusions in the 6th and Furlong area. We validated that with the other studies as well. Everyone indicated on their 6th and Furlong area. There was property out there at one time being offered, and it was not utilized in a timely manner, and it fell away from us where we couldn't use it anymore. The owners took it back. We also, like I said, looked at the growth in that area, and there's a lot of commercial properties out there, entertainment, retail, and then also included going out there is the Sunflower Foundation, which is over $100 million project. Deputy Chief Kelly Adams, he's been doing all this research for us to prepare for accreditation, and he's looked at that, taken our data, which is the first time this has been done. Everybody else that did their studies, they collected the data and showed it as to what they thought it should be. But we collected the data, and all of this information that you're receiving tonight comes from that data that Chief Kelly Adams has gathered for us. And we're stand for any questions at this time. I know we sent out all the information requested from the council.
Councilman Cohen, to be followed by Councilman Lesser.
Mr. City Manager, does approval of the land, does this vote mean we're going to shut down any fire stations in town?
Not right now, but the intent would be is that we would eventually shut down Station 11 with the eventual, once the building was complete at the new location, 11 would move to that location and 11 would be shut down. As far as an active fire station, we still feel there are other uses that we can have that are beneficial that have been considered in the capital improvement plan that we could use that station for. So eventually, the answer is eventually it would be closed unless there was a change with regards to funding that would allow us to keep it open. That's the need that we have. It's a little over $1 million to have a single truck station, and so we would need to have that within the operating budget in order to be able to keep that station open.
Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There again, let me clarify a little bit of Councilman Cohen's question. What we are voting on, though, tonight is simply the acquisition of the land off of the 6th and Fairlawn corridor. And in the event that in the future, when that, when and if that gets built, quite frankly, I mean, we lost the opportunity in the past when we had a good spot of land available, which is another reason of why we're here now today. But in the event that that does happen, at that point in time, prior to the reallocation of the current Fire Station 11 or the closing of Fire Station 11, that too would come back before the council for approval on that, correct?
Right, because we would need to have a funding source in order to be able to keep it open. So my budget would propose that it would be shut in order to be able to run the new station, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, what I'm just wanting to clarify is that's another discussion at another point in time of whether or not we close 11 or we try to keep both of them open or we refurbish it into other options. Tonight, it's just the acquisition of the land, so then we can start evaluating all those processes.
Right, because there's actually, the next step, Councilman, would be is that in our capital improvement budget, we're going to need to have an additional million, or 1.1 million is our current estimate, in order to be able to build that station. So in your capital improvement budget that you'll see for 2021, I'll have to have an additional allocation from you before I can even begin construction, because at this point, I don't have the funding that would be necessary to build that station. In addition, as you were saying, we would have to have the discussion about the operating budget as to whether or not 11 would need to close or not.
Thank you.
And I wanted to make a comment. I know that we have several people that want to speak on this issue. However, here's what I'm going to say. We're being told that it's the same distance, 1900 Northwest Lyman, which was a location of a fire. If you were to move Station 11 to where this location is at, which is next to Dr. Cassidy pretty much, our response time is supposed to be under 4 minutes. This says 7 minutes taking Highway 24. So I think that we need to be very cognizant of what we're saying. And my concern is that the perception in our community is that we are moving a fire station from a very low-income area of our town to a side to our community that is not. Now, while I will say I am absolutely supportive of us building this station. This station has been on the rosters for a long time. This is the only district in the city of Topeka that does not have a fire station.
True, 7 doesn't.
Oh, 7, okay. And so we know that we have some districts that do not have coverage, and I understand that we have businesses, but here's what we have to work on. I want to make sure that if we approve this, that it is not contingent on a station closing, because I think that there is a lot more conversation to be had on this. There's a lot more numbers that we need to look at. There's a lot more that we need to figure out. And City Manager and I had a wonderful conversation today in which I was telling him, hey, at this point in time, we need to figure out a win-win. But I don't think that closing one of the stations is the answer. So I'm happy to support this. I absolutely agree. It's been long overdue. There's another fire station that will come after that one, and guess where that one would be? It's next to my house. Not my house, but it's close to Montera. Station 14 is slated to be in between the Mars factory and that Topeka Boulevard area. But I want to make sure that us voting yes to acquire this property, which is needed, is not a sure fit that we are going to shut down a fire station that is still very needed in our community. Absolutely.
And that's exactly what I wanted to say as well, is, you know, similar to what we were talking about on the previous issue. This is about the acquisition of the land, all the things that you said, and it is not tied to a decision being made that we're going to shut down a fire station. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, to be followed by Councilwoman Ortiz, to be followed by Councilman Jensen, to be followed by Councilwoman Hiller. A lot of people want to talk on this issue.
And I'm going to be a minute because I've got all the emails that I received from my constituents. So I told them they wanted me to fight and ask questions, and that's what I'm going to do. A couple of things. We all know if we buy this land now, that's beginning to the end. I mean, you go out and buy a new car and then go, let's decide what we'll do with the old one later. You're going to get rid of it. So I don't think it's just about purchasing this land. I think the two go together. Did you recommend, Chief, you said you were tasked with this. Was it in the report or whatever you reported to City Manager that we don't need 11? Or how did you respond? Yes, this would be coverage enough?
We were given the task to utilize current resources.
Meaning close 11?
We were picked 11 because that was the least negative impact on response times.
Okay, can you
Like I
tell
said.
me, you sent us this call volume response time. Can you tell me how to read it? Because you say, like, from the Frith Northwest, and you have Station 11 response 626, proposed is a time, Station 11's a time.
Can you tell me which one you're looking at real quick, please?
The HK 0004. I'm not sure how to read your
Okay. The top section represents our historical data. You can see the first line is Station 11.
Right.
That's the number of calls that Station 11 responded to in that area in 2017, 18, and so far 19.
Okay,
And their travel times to that area.
okay.
That's historical data. Station 1 has not responded to that area at this time, so they didn't have a travel time. You had asked, I believe, for the actual driving times. I actually took one of our fire trucks, not a city car, but a fire truck, and drove from these locations of the proposed new fire station and the addresses, or these quadrants, excuse me. Going from the proposed new location to that quadrant took me 7 minutes and 4 seconds.
Well, Google says 19 minutes to 10 minutes. How did you make it in 7? But also, you have response time and then you have drive time.
Okay.
Which are you going by?
We were referring to the travel time on all of this. That's the only, that was our method of looking at this. Response time technically is the accumulation of the call-taking time, the turnout time, and the travel time. Travel's the one thing that we could look at. We could tell historically exactly what that was. We could somewhat predict that with GIS, and we had a national standard that would tell us what we should be looking at living up to.
So if you're saying 7:04 is the drive time, then you add 3 minutes or whatever, that's going to be 10 compared to 6?
If you added 3 minutes, yes, ma'am. And you would add, I would also state, you would add 3 minutes to the 6:26 as well above. That is strictly
So-
just the travel time.
Okay, so it shouldn't be response, it should be travel.
That would be a better, yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, so well, like I said, I used Google and it said 19 to 12 minutes or something, and the same from Redbud from 6th. You got 8 minutes compared to 5, and actually Google said about 17. This is what I think you're doing. I think you have a problem area over here. You're going to take this 11s and put over here, and then you're going to have a problem area over here. So all you're doing is moving your problem area. I mean, you're not really solving problem areas. And you said 1 million was adding the station, was that correct?
Yes, one of the questions that were asked and answered was question number 5. Councilman Jensen asked, what would it take to add a station? And their cost calculation is based on staffing and some fuel repair costs per unit, utilities, et cetera. It's $1,049,000.
But even if you're moving a company?
That is to establish a new company. That is the cost for a company, which would be one
I thought you'd be
engine
moving
station.
a company from 11 over there.
Well, actually, we moved a company and the rescue company, both would move to that location.
So it's not new company?
Well, yeah, like I said, if you kept 11 open, it would be new. That would be
Right.
your cost. To move it does not require any additional cost as far as regular operating from year to year. Did I not
Okay.
answer the question that you had? You asked how much was it cost to have one engine company, and that is $1,049,000.
What, okay, and that's fine. Then you said something about how many calls, and how many calls was 2,500? I've lost my questions that you've answered. I just have my notes from them. So you said something about there was how many calls were 2,500?
We estimated the call volume for the new station to be approximately 2,500 calls a year.
Okay, and where did you get that? Did you take that from this station, this station? How did you come up with that number?
That was if that location, what I would pick for the quadrants around that is the call volume they had for 2018, I'm sorry.
So then their call volume's going to go down. Everybody's going to kind of even out, correct? However, ones is going to go up
Ones would go up as well, yes, ma'am.
because 11 wouldn't be there.
Correct.
Okay, so, and once again, we're lowering these, raising this.
But not to an excessive level.
Exactly. What we found was that was going to level the playing field out, if you will, a little bit. Station 1 runs approximately a little over 1,000 calls a year. The call volume at Station 11 was 600, I believe. Even if they just give up half of that, that's going to bring them up to 1,300 calls, which is about, I think, average. I think I showed you 1,500 to 1,800, or if we averaged all the calls out amongst the stations. So it kind of brings their volume up a little bit. It brings Station 11's volume up some, and it would decrease Station 7 and 8, which are the two busiest, which are running 3,700 calls. That was the way we looked at it. There's a lot of different views you can take of that, ways to move companies around, but working with our resources, we felt that covered the city in the best with the least consequence.
But your preference, would it be to keep 11?
Thank you.
Of course, the firemen and the community would love to have 11 continue to stay open. The issue is that it's a budgetary constraint. We would have to make a decision that we're willing to tax more because the money isn't available based on what's happened to our budget the last few years. That money does not exist. And now, if you want to provide it to me, we will keep 11 open.
So you're going to tell these people up north, you're going to have to pay for your fire station. No one else has to. We're going to give the west side one, but you're going to have to pay for your fire station if you want one.
I think that if you, my answer would be is if you look at the response times, the people that currently live in District 9, they've been dealing with that for many years. And
That doesn't explain what I just said, though. So I get it. They've been
No, but
dealing
that's
with
the
that.
argument that anyone that lived in 9 would give.
Yeah, okay,
So it's the same argument,
Right.
whichever district you live in.
right.
I'm sorry, that's the political answer, is each district would say they want their fire
But
station.
that isn't the answer. So you're telling me I can tell my people up north, city manager, because you're in charge of city manager says you're going to have to pay for it because number 9 over here has been complaining because they don't have one. So we're just going to give them what they want and switch, you guys can complain.
My task is to try to provide the best service to all in the community, and this is an option that I'm presenting that I feel will improve overall the fire protection for this community. That's all I can give you.
And do you feel that way?
We look at it to equalize the response
But
capabilities
look at
within
these
in the
response
city.
times, they're all higher. How can you say it's going to be the same?
Well, if you look at some of the numbers or look back what Chief Adams has done, ones would pick up and some of their response times are equal to what 11s were responding to some parts of that community. And where 11s is moving to, the other parts of that community, they would be able to respond to in like time. Not perfect, but like time, but keep everybody around a 6-minute response time. That's the way it
Well, this
is.
looks
Some of the-
7, 8.
Some of the areas up in the northwest, have a 10-minute, 12-minute response time to them. And we're just trying to equalize everything out for the whole community with the resources that we do have.
Well, I know, but you're not equalizing. And my suggestion is you need to figure out how to keep 11. If you're going to build this station, you need to figure out how to keep 11 for those people, because that is just not fair. It's not fair to take away from one and give to another. That's it for now. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz was next.
Thank you. Don't put your thumb at me, because it's not fair. You said you were tasked by the city manager. What city manager? Is that our current city manager?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the reason why I asked, you're right, this has been going on for a long time. I'm going to be a minute as well. I didn't find my Bible. I have one, and I had to go back and highlight some things. To my colleagues, this is July 2006 study. That's right, you got it. 2006, we paid for this. There's some good stuff in here. Then, this is what I look at. 2016 update. This was to Mr. Colson, City Manager Colson. And I believe there's more. But it seems like we just pick and choose what we want to do. And I'm going to tell you why I say that. This year, June 2019, we were in a JETO meeting and the money went back to Mars. They wanted to. And the mayor said, we said we'll get back to that because we've never discussed that. And we need to have a thorough, complete discussion. That's what you said. And I was in agreement with that. Every time these fire stations get brought up, it's always something. Just like you said, number 9. We don't have the funding, another time, another point, and time. We'll talk about that. That's what I've heard since 2000. Yeah, you just said that. Another time and another point. And I've heard that over and over and over again. There was a group appointed, you can watch the tape, there was a group appointed, I want to know, by City Manager Colson. They appointed a group with city staff, firefighters, Local 83, personnel, fire personnel, and they all were in agreement on what we needed to do. They all were in agreement. Guess what? That's out the window. Mr. Gerber, if you got something to say it in your mic. I don't want no whispering, please. If you want to comment on that, comment in the mic, please. Again, we never got told that they appointed that, and nobody ever sent us that information on what everybody agreed on. Then I heard we're going to shut down 11. That was never brought back to the council. Our thoughts again. What do you want to do? How do we want to do that? He's saying it's his budget. It's the city's budget that he is directed to control. But it's our job to make sure that that money's there. If all 9 of us agree that we're going to put a new fire station in and we're going to raise the mill levy, that's what we do. I have made calls this week. I'm still waiting on some return calls to talk to the charity board again, because yes, we did. We let that time elapse. But also, I think what bothers me the most is we've never had a discussion. Oh, we had one last week that was, here's the information, go ahead, just process it for a few days, and we'll come back for a vote. I would like to see, and yes, in my book, it does say the 6th and Fairlawn. The same study says the 6th and Fairlawn is the proper location. It also said to take station number 6, which is in Oakland, and move it further out east. But there's no growth out there. So I can't see shutting that down. I think it needs to be left right where it's at. It also talked about the gaps between engines 7, 11, and 12, and how we're going to do that, fulfill those. And also, it talked about the community expectations that we have never, ever had. Never. this is not my words, this is this report. The response time required to get there, the distribution, location of fire station, the concentration number of responding units and personnel, the reliability in the response, training expectations of personnel, quality of equipment, tools, and community is willing to financially support, community relations, and public relations. And that's the key that we've never, ever had. I hear time and time again, we don't have the funding. I've asked about the new station, Station 13. I asked Mr. Colson. I asked when Mr. Harmon was sitting there campaigning and we broke ground out there and everybody said, it's in the budget. We can do this. We can shift that. I don't even know because I was told it was in the budget and we can buy this and we can buy that. I think it's a good thing. You know, they wanted to shut 3s down. We've remodeled it since. It had it in the plan. And where are the people that do the work? Where's our engagement with them? The people that are driving the streets, the people that are riding, our firefighters, our brothers, our local 83, where are they at? How come they're not at the table? We need to have a really serious conversation about what we're going to do. Not a letter saying that staff came back and said, we don't need this. We need to have a conversation with everybody at the table. I would like that report, and I would like to put this on hold for a while so that we can have a conversation to make sure this is what we all want to do and we all understand. Because it's very evident that we don't understand. We get dinged for our response times. Our response times is 7 and 8 minutes. And Mayor, guess what? You might not get a fire station out there.
I know.
That's sad. That's really sad because we had the funding there. We should have figured it out. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying it's time to sit down at the table and let's figure this out. Not say, oh, well, you know, that conversation will come later and yeah, we don't need that and, you know, staff is that. Where are the people that drive them? I've been in those trucks. I've been on calls. I've been at the dinner tables. I've been riding with them. It's scary out there. It's tough out there. Those guys do so much with little or nothing. Fire Station 3 is great. I'm glad it got remodeled. The only thing I do have a couple issues with that, the island's too big. Did we ask them? Did we ask them for their input? Their chairs are too small. We got guys that are 6, 7 feet tall. I barely fit in one. Again, we need some community involvement. We need to come back to the table. I would like to see the report that was done, that Colson appointed. And I would like to really know how much money we really have. Because I've told, well, we spend a little bit here, we spend a little bit there. I can't see shutting down a fire station. And I'll tell you why. I'm about ready to cry, too. We didn't have 2s. Do you remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
We didn't have 2s. Fire Station 2 was at 6th and Rice Road. All we had was Hancock. That's Fire Station 3. Fire Station 3. My best friend's daughter burnt in a fire because we couldn't get to her in time. And this council, we have been so close, so close. We got East Topeka, low to moderate income. Wiring's bad, houses are close together. I sit up here month after month pushing those fire detectors because it does save lives. And when it hits home, it hits home. That little girl burned up. And after that, we sat down and the council said we need a station there because we don't have proper coverage. And you know what? That's what you're going to do. If you take 11s, the response time is going to kill somebody in North Topeka. And we have more businesses now than we had before when we had this study in 2006. We've got more people up there. We have been very, very lucky that nobody has died. No families, no tragedies. We've been very lucky, but our luck's going to run out. At some point, we've got to figure it out, and that's our job. Not staff's, not city managers, that's our job as elected officials. Let's see some community involvement. Thank you.
Councilman Jensen to be followed by Councilman Lesser.
So I'll start by apologizing to the volunteer firefighters in the county. They took my comments last week to mean that they are not trained, and that was not the case at all. I'm thrilled that they are willing to take on more partnership with the city and help us fight fires up there. I will disagree with this council's treatment of staff in this situation. We very clearly for years have told them, do more with less, do more with less. So they've come back to us and said, here's how we can balance our fire stations with our existing allocations. Yeah, we don't have enough money to have 2 fire stations. That's the reality of life. And if you aren't happy with it, then, you know, good luck hunting through the budgets to find the money. I will remind all of us around this table that that is our job, to find the money to accomplish these things, or to raise taxes and get it. I absolutely do not support closing Station 11. I think we need more resources on the north side of the river. I will support buying this property because it does lay the foundation for making what I firmly believe is a good decision in building another fire station there. But for us to yell at staff about doing what we've asked them to do is absolutely inappropriate. I feel bad for the folks of you who are still on the council, or going to be on the council, because you're right, you're going to have to raise taxes to build another fire station. I very, very highly doubt you can carve $1 million something out of our existing already tight budget to build another fire station, despite the fact that I do agree with Councilman Ortiz in that we need it. We need more fire protection in the city. So yeah, it's got to be done. But going back to staff to gripe at them for doing what we've asked them to do, I disagree with that completely. I think you guys have done a good job with what we've asked you to do. I absolutely agree that closing Station 11 is not the right idea. We need to build an additional one, and we've needed that for years. But it's the council's job to provide the money to do that, and we have not. You know, the city manager submits a budget every year that meets our criteria and qualifications, and absolutely every year that I've been on the council, we've looked them square in the face and say, do not raise taxes. Find a way to make it work. You know what? You can't find a way to make it work with the existing budget. So for those of you who are still on the council, it's time to raise taxes to deliver these services, or you're going to have to start cutting stuff. And it's going to have to cut an awful lot of stuff to get $1 million. So with that, I will call the question, and I will move to approve.
Not everyone's had a chance to speak.
So the calling the question only works when there's nobody that disagrees with it. We've had a statement of disagreement with the calling the question. I would defer now to Councilman Lesser to be followed by...
Well, you haven't given people an opportunity for a second.
Oh, so do we have a second for the call to vote? We have a second for the call to vote?
No, the motion was to approve.
Oh,
not
to approve,
call.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
You're right, though. Call the question first.
So we have a motion and a second. Do you second to call the question? Okay, so we have a motion and a second to call the question. At this point in time, because we have a motion and a question to call the question, we have to vote whether you want...
Who moved to call the question, Mayor?
You did.
No, ma'am, I moved to approve, not to call.
Oh, you said call the question in your
I said call the
comments.
question, and then I will move to approve.
Okay,
So if we can't call the question despite the precedent of doing so, that's fine, but I still move to approve. We've got to get this done, folks.
so we have a motion for approval, and we have a second by Councilman Padilla.
No, he didn't, he
You
did
called
not
the-
approve, he did not approve, he called it. We need to have them,
It's got to be, you've got to vote on the call question.
No, I've recalled that.
He recalled
You
it.
withdrew it?
I
Yeah,
withdrew
my
it.
motion was to approve. It had nothing to do with calling the question.
So we have a motion on the floor to approve the purchase of the land. Do we have a second?
Now you can discuss.
We don't have a second. Okay, so motion doesn't have a second. We do have additional discussion. Councilman Lesser.
Thank you. Couple things. There again, I want to stay on task of what we're voting on tonight is to purchase the land. We are in no way, shape, or form voting on closing number 11. I do not support closing number 11, but we have the opportunity to purchase an ideal piece of property in District 9 that is needed for a new fire station. I can't question whether or not what I can say is our population has been stagnant. I can't question, though, whether or not there's more people or more growth in North Topeka as was stated. What I can say fundamentally without question is we have huge facilities of Federal Home Loan Bank, of the security benefit, of the Sunflower Foundation that are going up there that are going to be within a block of where this is at, that employs in excess of probably 10,000 people. That I can say for a fact. But there again, I want to reiterate that I do not support closing. I think staff has done a good job, as my colleague has said, in getting the data, and we can argue that at a future time. What we're voting on now is the acquisition of the land and then moving forward. And I don't want us to miss out on this, because I'll be really honest, is when we had the land that was being gifted to us, the city manager and the council at that time failed. They failed, okay? And that's not this city manager. If you're on the council at that point in time, we failed. If we would have built a 10 by 10 metal building on the property, we would have still had that property. No, we would have. I've read the contract. Yeah. I've talked to them. If we would have bid a 10 by 10 storage deal and put a canoe in it, we would have had that property, and we failed to do that. We have the opportunity now to get that ideal land, and then we can work down the road of doing that. And I support what Sylvia, what you say of doing that. But let's not let this pass by again and miss out again. And let's fight that battle when we get to it. Thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller or Councilman Padilla?
No. Okay. Thank you, Mayor. I have a problem voting on any of these pieces until we do a master strategic plan. We've talked about it for years. We kick one can, then we kick another can. Only weeks ago, the city manager said, we're not ever going to do 14. I'm going to pull it out of the CIP. If the mayor didn't hear that, then she still thinks it's going to happen. We got in trouble with Mars, expectations on that. And we owe it as the governing body and with the city manager to wrap around and do that master plan. Do the analysis. What we got when we asked for things was a city manager, and I think you need to watch when stuff comes to us and make sure it's complete and whole. We got a definition of the response time that was in internal conflict on page 1. The alarm handling time is one thing by fire standards. The turnout time is another, and the travel time is a third. And then we got told this is what the response time is. It's the total of the 3, but it's being presented as just now clarified that it's not response time, really, it's travel time. We asked for the drive time to the sites. What we did was got a pretty thorough display of how it would flip in terms of the access to the sites north of the river. We did not get corresponding information about the fact that the 21st and Urish station is only 5 miles away, and what service can there be to that area at the same or less response time than they have now, in terms of making a good master decision on which stations would be there or where. There was talk about river access. They're storing the boats up there now. There's another one at 6th and Croco, so that if there's an event farther down the river, people can access it. We've got 2 locations. That's a good thing. It's wise. We asked about one of the things that the study that's not been mentioned, the CPSM one, which was in 2015, was they said, look at your response times, look at those other layered pieces in there, but then also look at what you got. Make sure that you prioritize both prevention, but your service on what you've got. So the brand new residences and office space are not going to be as taxing on service as your older properties, such as what we have north of the river, your industrial sites, which we have a lot of north of the river, as well as the trailer courts and the junkyards that we have in the existing Station 11 route. We asked for growth, and I think the staff misunderstood that question perhaps on the second or third time around. What we got was a growth history for south of the river, no growth projections for south of the river, and no growth information for north of the river, all of which needs to be looked at in aggregate to figure out how many stations we need, who can serve them, how to balance, rather than just talking about this one this week, this one next week, this one another time. We're not doing a good job in planning our city, in providing the leadership that's needed, and certainly in terms of projecting for money that's needed. And so I understand that this has either been sought or has rolled up, I don't know, but I can't vote on spending money or advancing on any of these until we have a master plan. We've been waiting and we've been talking, and we can do it. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
It's just final thoughts. You said, this lays the foundation for a new station, but it also lays the foundation to close 11, and that's what I'm concerned about. I would like to ask the city manager, we received the strategic plan from fire. Did you look at that? Is that an okay plan with you? Because in my opinion, this is not a strategic plan. It's a list of items to be done, I guess.
Well, it's the strategic plan as far as the tasks and priorities that the department has, as far as...
And I didn't get that. I just got a list. I didn't get timeline. I didn't get how you're going to measure it. I didn't get who's responsible for it. And that, to me, is a strategic plan.
Okay.
So I guess I would need more information for that. But the bottom line is, I really just think this is an unfair thing to even think about doing.
Councilman Cohen?
Okay, so somebody said something about, can we delay this for 6 months? And is that an option? And then maybe by then we can kind of be a little bit more organized on taking action?
My only concern of delaying this vote is the fact that we already have a piece of property with an offer on hand, and us withdrawing and coming back is going to significantly probably increase the value of the land because they know that we're interested in it. And that's my concern. But Councilman Dobler, do you have some remarks?
Is it possible to make an amendment that approval of purchase of this property would not result in the closing of Station 11?
I was going to propose that, but thank you for doing that.
Second.
There's no motion.
I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, you can make a motion.
Okay, so when there's a motion made, an amendment would be appropriate not to include closing Station 11. Thank you.
So you're making that motion? Or you're suggesting that somebody make that motion?
Procedurally, can we make a complete motion and add that? So can I make a motion to approve the purchase of this property contingent upon it not including the closing of Station 11?
Or if you wouldn't mind the friendly amendment, this is what I had in mind. Would it be possible to make a motion that stated that the body would approve to purchase this piece of property with the contingency that within the next 3 months, the council would reconvene with the firefighters, with the city staff, for us to do a master planning session to determine how the stations are going to be allocated. Which doesn't mean that there's going to be a closure. It would mean that we would have a full discussion of all the stations, which is what the council is requesting. That's my question, if we could do something like that, and if the council would be amenable to it. City manager.
City attorney.
So Mayor, this item is approval of real estate agreement. So either, purchase the property and give the city manager the authority to proceed in that manner, or you decide not to. But if you're saying, as I understand it, to proceed with the purchase of the property, and that goes through, and it's not contingent on anything, but then make the statement that within X number of months, this strategic planning meeting will happen, at which time you'll develop some kind of more formal master plan, then that's allowable.
Councilwoman Ortiz?
We got to do that at some point. What I was trying to do is get with the Sisters of Charities at their next board member to see if there's any way that, we can look at their property. And because of what we hear, there's no funding. There's no funding. So if we can even get them to come down on their price, it looks like this guy is set on his price. That's what I was looking at. I just don't think that it just really bothers me. And I know, Brendan, you said, we asked staff to do this. I don't remember asking staff to do that. I've asked time and time that we talk about the stations. We've got to talk about it. We've got to have that harsh talk. We've got to make that harsh decision. So as for me, I've always asked, and we'll do it. We didn't, and then boom, something just pops up. Just like here's the property that popped up. Now you're asking us to approve it.
City manager?
Councilwoman Ortiz, as far as why this has come forward, when I arrived, this was an open project that needed to be completed. My responsibility is to complete those projects. And so, or we turn the funding back. And so I felt there was a need and desire still to have a station at this location in this general area. And with it being an open CIP project, I need to move that forward. And so that's what I did. I waited a period of time before taking the steps, but that's the decision, was that it needed to be moved forward because it's an existing CIP project approved by a council 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I'm trying to think of the exact date, but it was approved a long time ago, and we needed to move it forward.
Can I respond? City manager, with all due respect, I just wish you would have communicated with us. This is what I'm looking at. This is what I want to do, so that we would have some input on that. And I recognize why it went back, because I was told, but not by you, but by, the other city manager, we don't have the money, we don't have the money, we don't have the money. We'll talk about it another time, we'll talk about it another time. So I am looking for it to come back to the table, and it never did. It never did until June of 2019. And again, I was told, we're going to have some deep conversations about that, and it never happened. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, and then after that, I'm going to ask for a recess because it's 8 o'clock, and we've been on this subject for a while, so.
So in response to what you were thinking about amending, my only concern with that is, so we get this committee, we get everybody at the table, and somebody goes, hey, you know what we could do? And it doesn't even involve this land. Say it's another new idea, and then you're stuck with the land, but you've already talked it out with all these people, and that's not the best idea, because we haven't had that conversation yet. So that's why I would be fearful of buying the land before we have that conversation.
City manager?
I just consulted with Lisa. I think the best option here is that if we want to pursue having such a meeting, we make that as a motion before we make the motion to purchase the land. We can have that motion, so that sets the table for that and establishes that. And then it's a second motion to purchase the land, and we vote on that. That way, the purchase of the land is not contingent on something else, which is what we have to do with regards to a land purchase. So if we start back over, make the motion similar, somebody make the motion similar to what you were trying to say regarding having a meeting, then we can do that. And then have another motion that would establish the purchase of the land.
So we need to withdraw a motion? We don't have any motion on the table. The motion failed. That's right.
Okay.
For lack of a second. So is,
So are you going to charge? So are you asking her to charge a committee with, standing up a committee to determine how all this stuff is supposed to work?
No.
I guess I don't understand, we need to fund another fire station. Where are we going to get the money is what we need to be discussing, not how we're going to reallocate resources. It's political suicide to close a fire station, folks, let's face it, we're not doing that. So rather than fool around with that, let's talk about how we properly fund an additional fire station. Is that what I'm hearing the motion needs to be?
it's more complicated than that, Councilmember Jensen, because what we're saying is that we have several studies. There seems to be an appetite from the body to have a discussion with regards to what does support for fire look in our community overall. We know for a fact, which is why I'm so inclined to approve the land on 6th Street or on Governor Street, whatever, that is one of the areas that has been identified that has a gap in service. So knowing that that is one of the areas, I am very inclined to support the purchase of the land so that we have that land. But I think that the other comments that are coming from the body is that there is a desire for some robust roundtable conversation to include the firefighters. Councilwoman Ortiz also included the union and our drivers so that we can all sit down and have a discussion on where we all as a team feel like that the city would be better served.
I'm not hearing you at all mention increased funding, additional fire stations.
Which that would be one of the determinations in that meeting, if that is the case. But it would be a comprehensive conversation of this body with our team so that we could then have the determination of whether the community appetite at that point in time, because of course the public would be invited after we have that discussion, would be to present to the community the options, and then we would be able to have a discussion on whether we increase the mill levy to add more staff, or whether we do reallocations. But what the body is saying is we need to have a comprehensive conversation with regards to fire service in our community. Councilman Lesser.
Thank you,
To be followed by
Madam Mayor.
Councilman Dogler.
And I completely agree with that process, and I will say, my son's a firefighter. He's a volunteer firefighter in Hutchinson, and he's going through. So there's not a bigger supporter of the firemen than I am. What I will say is, I do agree. We need to have a master plan, and I do agree. What we have is not a fundamental master plan of what we have. We do have to redo that, and in defense of Chief is, we've had all these, Sylvia and I talked about, we have got all of these damn studies out and about, and everybody, and the nice thing about that, depending on what your position is you can refer to each one of them that you want to get what you want. So we need to redo that. We need to redo that, and I completely, wholeheartedly agree with that. But there is, without question, there's no fire station in District 9 in my district. There is, without question, where we want to put this ideal with river access for the riverfront development that we're looking at too, that they can get to, boom, just like that. We have tons of employees there. We as an insurance professional, I know that the cost that not having protection and then to these multi-million-dollar buildings, what that effect is. These are also targets, if there is some type of a target, because of the number of employees we have in those buildings. If there's going to be a terrorist target, those are the types of places that are going to get hit. So it's really without argument, and I'm not hearing that from anybody. I mean, I agree more than I disagree with Sylvia and with Sandra. There is without argument that we need one there. That's what I don't want to miss, is bypassing the opportunity that we have. And if we buy this land, we all can agree in the up-and-coming area of both commercial, and then housing even up to the north and stuff, and then the new, I forgot again, the other thing I didn't add is the huge assisted living facility that's right up the street that has people who aren't ambulatory in some of them and can't even get out. So there's another huge deal that we have there. So there's value to that land. If we buy it and whatever it falls through in a year, 2 years, 3 years, we're probably going to make some money on it, to be quite honest with you, because real estate's appreciating up in that deal. So that's where I'm at. I'm not in any disagreement. We need to sit down, all get at the table with our administration, with our firemen, with the council, create a new master plan, evaluate everything. But let's not bite our nose to spite our face and let another piece of property that's ideal for this exposure, get away from us, and then we're back to square one having this conversation again, and we don't have the ideal opportunity to where we're going to place it. That's all I'm saying.
Councilman Dobler.
I generally support purchasing this property. I think it's the right location. But I also understand that once we do it, it sets things in motion. My concern with getting a group together or study or whatever sounds good now, and then a couple months from now, everybody's forgotten about it. Wonder if I could ask Mr. Peak a question.
Yes, council member.
Dr. Peak, you did the negotiation for this property, or somebody on your staff?
Somebody on our staff did the negotiation.
Is it possible to get an option for a short period of time? And I'm thinking short, like 2 months.
We'd have to go back and ask the owner that. The current agreement we had basically expires at the end of the year. We reached out to the owner and said, we don't know where council's going to be on this. Would you be willing to extend for 45 days? He said he was amenable to that, but that was just a conversation. We don't have anything in writing on that at this time.
I'm just wondering if we can tie these two things together, so we set something in motion that has a date certain, and at that point we make the decision. If that's not possible, I'm willing to support this tonight. Thank you.
Motion to approve the mayor's committee.
The mayor's committee. Do we have a second? Second. We have a motion and a second to approve a committee that will consist of city staff leadership, fire leadership, the community, and the local 83 as well, to discuss a master plan of the fire stations. So we have a motion, we have a second, we have discussion. Councilwoman Heller.
Is there a willingness to add some of the time frames in there that were discussed earlier? What I'm thinking of is that group would be, it would be organized such that that group would have met no later than 3 months from now with a goal, this is the new part, with a goal of actually having a plan framed within no more than 6 months.
So I'm not opposed to that. My fear is, to some degree, we don't know what the work is until we get into it. And if we put a deadline on them that's unachievable, then we've already set them up for failure. And I would much rather have a quality product than a rushed product. So perhaps the compromise is a report of status within that time frame.
Been through 10 years of that, 11 going on 11. The can is well worn.
Mm-hmm.
Going down the road.
Well, I would counter with, we don't need to do this, we just need to fund the fire stations. But, to do a comprehensive look at the community where we have 10 different studies with 30 different options and 100 million different ways of accomplishing it, to tell them you have to have all that reviewed in 2 weeks, I think that's an unreasonable request.
City manager.
I think the one thing that will affect how fast we were able to move is we have a budget that'll be coming up on us, and the decision-making related to this is going to need to be included in that budget, both in the CIP and in the operating budget. So therefore, time will be of the essence, and we will need to move as quickly as we can. And so I think that's our official deadline, really, is the impact that we'll have on the budget. I'll need to know that information in order to calculate that in. So work will begin and work in earnest.
Councilwoman Hiller?
Well, if I may, if that means we've been making these decisions piecemeal by budget instead of with a master plan for that whole, more than that time, since before 2006 when they decided to do that study. And so does that mean then that if I may ask across the table, that your feeling is that we could set a goal of having the plan done within 3 months? If we need to have it done before the CIP gets passed?
I think that's a reasonable target. I think that that's the type of thing that we need to strive for. But as I said, there's about a 5 month. We get to May, I have to know, or actually probably before then, more like April, I need to know that information anyway. Because there's information based on those decisions that will need to be incorporated in the CIP and in the operating budget. So it's clearly a time crunch. It will force us to have these meetings and get this conducted.
Does that satisfy you, Councilwoman?
It's the best I've heard yet.
All right, so we have the motion, we have a second, and this motion, voting yes, would be to assign a committee with the stipulations established earlier, with a time frame not to exceed the month of April, with a plan so that we can approve whatever that comes to be in our budget. So a vote yes would be for that committee to be put in place. Oh, there's some urgency here.
All right, we have 9 yes.
Okay, 9 having voting yes. We also have a motion for approval of the land.
No.
Oh, do you have a motion? We have a motion, we have a second. Okay, we've had discussion. Are we ready for that vote? Oh, sorry. Councilwoman Hiller.
Just don't take it personally, but I'm going to follow through on what I said.
Okay. Councilwoman Ortiz?
And I too, number 9, I'm gonna, I wanted more time. It would have been nice to have a few more weeks at least to try to get with them to see what we could do to save as much money as possible. I mean, and that's something that I've pushed for years. It's nothing personal. I'm all for the location, just not the price.
Not taken personally, other than the fact you were supposed to ask me for tacos this week and you didn't, so.
Okay, we proceed with the vote.
Be clear, board.
Are you rescinding on your thoughts?
No.
It's the taco thing that threw her.
Not going through me.
Let's try this again. Okay. Okay, we have 7 yes, Ms. Hiller and Ms. Ortiz voting no.
7 having voting yes, the motion passes. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
I will not be here when you have this big discussion, but remember, do not close 11. I mean, get the land, get your station, I agree we need it, but we also need 11. And I think Ms. Alcala-Devia will do the same thing. Thank you.
All right, we recess, Councilman Lesser.
The only other thing I would say is, since we did talk about having community members being part of the committee, no one has any better information than you do. Maybe you would be a good committee member.
I got her.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, we recess to a 10-minute break. We now reconvene the meeting. At this point in time, we move on to item F for final action item on the agenda. If the clerk would read.
F is approval of the disposal of real property located at 421 Southwest Huntoon Street.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. The idea of the sale of the land at 421 Southwest Huntoon was proposed by Mr. Schultz in S&L Apartments. They contacted the city The city wasn't actively marketing this piece of property. The city has utilities that bisect the property, reducing its value considerably compared to the other lots in the area. The negotiations were ongoing for many months before a price was finally agreed to. The issue of the sale of the land at this location has been a discussion I've had a discussion with Councilman Emerson, and he brought some of his points at the last meeting, which is why we delayed action. Councilman Emerson is a contractor and has strong feelings that 12th Street Southwest project contractor may want to use this land for a shop trailer or a material storage location. Staff has reviewed the need and does not feel it will be required, as a good amount of right-of-way area will be available for the project. However, staff is not pushing necessarily the sale of this lot. It was an opportunity. The reasons brought forward by Councilman Emerson cast doubt on the appropriateness for us to sell this lot at this time. I think at this point, I'm willing to acquiesce in us pursuing not selling the land at this time. Per our drafted agreement with the purchaser, we are going through with the sale if the governing body were to approve it, but if it is desired, it does not pass. If it's denied, it does not pass. And I think it is best, given the reservations from the governing body, that I recommend that the governing body not approve the sale and put closure to this issue, and we can address it at a later date. We can re-engage with the owner at that later date and see if they're still interested. This is not a situation that, in my opinion, we need to spend additional time on. However, per the agreement that's offered, it requires approval of the city council. And so the best course of action to put closure on it at this point is for the council to make a motion to deny it, and then that way it ends and doesn't leave it as a hanging issue in the future with the owner wondering whether we're ever going to approve it, ever bring it back, et cetera. We'll make sure, we'll see if they're interested in potentially purchasing it in a few years and see what happens after the project's completed.
So since there is not a motion to deny, then we would put it up for vote and then just vote no, correct?
Yeah, that's true, yes.
All right.
You could, yeah, you'd have a motion to approve, but in a second, but then it would be vote against approving that.
I'll make a motion to approve so I can vote against it.
Perfect.
Sounds like
So we have a
fun.
second? Okay, Councilman Cohen seconds, Councilman Jensen.
Yeah, so it should be noted, on my 5 years on the council, we have never unanimously denied something, so that will be a first, I think. But I'm curious, what would we ever do with this property? It doesn't seem very large to me at all.
My expectation is we won't do anything, and we were lucky to have anyone offer us any money for this property.
Okay.
But, you know, at this point, it's not worth the pursuit, with the possibility that there may be a need. We were not identifying it, but I also just feel like it's not worth an issue that we spend time further on.
So there's no reason to keep it, but we're keeping it.
For the moment.
Okay.
Okay, Councilwoman Hiller to be followed by Councilman Lesser.
I have been in only on the edge of some of these questions or discussions, but apparently when big road projects are done or sewer projects are done, the contractors have to pay. If there's not enough room to get their vehicles out of the street, they have to pay, and often it's quite substantial to have a staging area to hold their equipment during the course of the project. And my understanding is that was Councilman Emerson's concern. He quoted even a figure of, and maybe that's down in the riverfront when they were doing the water lines, of $19,000 just for the course of a fairly short-term project duration. And so we've got quite a bit that will be done on 12th Street along the way. So I think that's what I understood was some of his experience and concern about that.
But we were just told, if I might, we were just told that would not be used, this property would not be useful for that.
It would be, if it's needed.
City manager?
We were just told it would not be.
Well, staff evaluated it, and their opinion was that it would not be usable by the contractor. However, by selling it, we eliminate that possibility for the contractor. So therefore, it's not an expectation on our part that it's going to be needed, but rather than assume in that regard, we'll just make sure that it would be available Because if we sell it, it won't be.
Good enough for me.
Councilman Lester?
Yeah, no, that was, the other thing is, the amount that we're selling this for was $1,000. And I don't think we need $1,000, that badly, and quite frankly, not that I'm saying this, but if that was the case, I'd like to have had the opportunity, and I would have given $1,001. I mean, I think it's more appropriate to put that up for sale versus, and I understand the concept of adjoining owner and stuff like that, but it is also right on the corner of basically Huntoon and Topeka Boulevard, and things change, who knows?
Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you. I would just like a legal opinion. This is a non-action item. Do we need to make a motion?
No, we're still. No, we're still, we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking that was, my phone glasses off. Thank you.
All right, so at this point in time, the vote no would allow us to free the land so that we could keep it and then evaluate it at a later time. So, at this point in time? Yeah. So at this time, we proceed with the votes. A vote no would mean that we're releasing the land so that the city could keep it and decide later on what to do with it.
We have 8 no.
8, having voted no, the motion carries. I mean, the motion fails, therefore we keep the land. I know, it's confusing. That being said, it's 8:43, my friends. Have some humor. Line 4, the non-action items, if the clerk would read.
A is discussion concerning the city's process for acquiring and disposing of real property.
City manager.
Thank you, Mayor. As staff continues to conduct RPIs on various processes, we identify old language in the code does not reflect a quality process or one that is similar or is not similar to other large cities in Kansas. Tonight, Mary Feeney, Assistant City Attorney, is going to, is she assistant or deputy? Deputy City Attorney.
Deputy.
Yeah, look out.
Are we to stand and walk away?
Be seated.
She's going to discuss one of those types of language changes in the code that we feel is warranted. I've received some email regarding this change and some concern about this change from a governing body member. After Mary's presentation, we'll be interested in hearing your feedback on this matter so we know if there's interest in moving this legislation forward or if changes are necessary to allow consideration. Mary?
Good evening, governing body. The ordinance amendment before you is the product of our RPI process. You had the legal department, staff from engineering, public works, neighborhood relations. We spent several days studying how the city acquires property and how it disposes of surplus property. And we looked at it, the ordinance itself was passed in 1991, and things have changed significantly since that time. In 1991, we had a real estate management office, we had a real estate officer, and that officer was responsible for disposing of property, acquiring property, leasing property. Most of it was urban renewal property, which we don't have anymore. So this ordinance is long overdue for a real in-depth look-see process. So our committee looked at the process that we utilize now. We looked at what other cities, large cities in Kansas do, and what you have in front of you are the changes that we're recommending. And I'll go through them very quickly. The governing body will retain its authority to approve purchases, sales, transfers, and donations. That's not going to change. Easements and rights-of-way have never been within the purview of the governing body, and that's not going to change when we need to purchase easements and rights-of-way for public improvement projects. Disposal of surplus property, we're going to keep those various methods of disposing of surplus property, auctions, sales, competitive bids. We are going to update it to add donations, which we don't have, and then any other method approved by the governing body, which gives us flexibility in case there's some kind of internet-related way to dispose of property. So those are pretty, we're pretty much retaining the substance of the 1991 ordinance. The big change for your consideration is leases. Right now, the governing body has the authority to approve leases of city-owned property. So if we need property that we need to lease for one of our departments, the governing body oversees that if the lease exceeds $10,000 a year. The governing body also has the authority to approve leases when we lease our property to third parties if the lease amount is over $10,000 a year. You have the authority to do that now. These amendments would remove that authority. And staff is making that recommendation because of all the cities we looked at, the cities don't handle leases on an administrative basis. The governing body doesn't have any involvement in leases. And the other reason that we're recommending removing that authority from the governing body is that it's a very rare event. It's very rare that the city leases property for one of its departments. It's also, we probably have maybe 2 contracts a year where we ask your approval to lease, like our water towers. We generally lease the area on our water towers to telecom companies. And if the rent exceeds $10,000, we come to you for approval. But that's fairly rare, maybe once a year, twice a year. So those are the changes in a nutshell. And I'm open to questions or concerns that you may have. And this will be back to you on January 7th for approval.
Did you all, thank you, Mary, did you all research the leasing of property for city staff use? And if so, how far back did you go?
Well, the governing body has had that authority since 1986. But we didn't really, I mean, what
The examples I think of
are
are 515 South Kansas, which the city leased on a
In the
long-term,
80s.
very expensive lease and got in a lot of trouble
In the
for
80s,
it.
yes.
In the 80s.
Yeah.
And I don't know how he pulled that off. Maybe actually it's been since 1986 because of what happened back then in the 80s. So I wondered if you had checked that out, because that was quite a controversy when it blew up. And a lease isn't just so much a year. Often those are long-term leases that the city then can't get back out of. I don't know how much the Armory lease is, but that's another one that's a little more recent.
Yes, and I don't know what that rent is. I don't know if that
Chief
lease
sitting back there,
ever,
he might know.
was it, is it 50,000 a year? Okay. So the council would have approved that
They
then.
did. But that's huge. That's a lot of money.
True,
And when
yes.
you're talking about moving a city department someplace else, the taxpayers are very conscientious about it, and it also is a message about where we do business and how we do business. I think of the 515 and the Armory choices, and so I didn't know if you had looked at those. Those were the big ones I knew about. And then in terms of leasing out, there's been discussion on some proposals and design about redoing City Hall right here and maybe leasing out to where the credit union used to be, right in the front of City Hall. And again, that's part of who we are, and I would think that we'd want to have the council engaged in a decision like that.
And you're right, that's a policy decision for y'all to make.
So I was pretty sure all 3 of those would have been over that 10,000 threshold, and
You're correct.
I mean, so just something to think about. I guess if we do them rarely, it's not a big deal, and I'd be inclined to leave it in, at least with the 10,000 threshold. So if you need to go rent something briefly,
Okay, yeah, all right.
just a thought.
Additional
No other
questions
comments?
for Deputy Attorney?
Okay, thank you.
Well, yes,
The other
Councilwoman.
question I had, so the purchases that we recently dealt with at the water treatment plant would still be,
Yes.
require council approval with
Yes.
your, okay,
Yeah, they would.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Mary. And thank you all for the work that you are all doing with the RPI process. We really appreciate it. This is the portion of the meeting that is allocated to public comment. However, the same way that we miraculously had an all-no vote, we also have no public comment this evening. At this point in time, we pass on to announcements. I don't think the clerk has anything this evening, but the city manager probably does.
The only thing I want to do is remind everybody that next week the offices are closed on Tuesday and Wednesday for the holiday. So please, if you're interested in conducting business with the city, do it by Monday so that we can fill your needs.
Well, to all of you on the council, I just want to tell you all how proud I am to serve with you in yet another year. We're about to just hit Christmas. We won't see each other till after the new year. Again, just want to say thank you to all of you and to all of our staff. As you saw tonight, our decisions may seem like they should be short action items, but typically they include a lot of deliberation. And our deliberation typically comes at the cost of our staff having to go back and doing more work. But this is a great governing body. We have a great relationship, and we discuss things, and that is what the democratic process is all about. So I want to say thank you to all of you. Very quickly, I just spent a few days with the Aspen Institute talking about government. The topic this weekend was democracy, the individual, and the community. And it was very interesting to see how all of those things played out here. Because if we want to have a democracy, it means that we cannot have one person making the decisions that is going to give equality to everybody. Talking about fire stations in different places. And if we want liberty, we're not going to have that ability to make sure that everybody has the same thing. And this country was built on liberty and options and choices. And it's great to see that working very well at the local level. So just want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Wish you all a beautiful new year. And just, again, remind all of you that there's people hurting all around us throughout this time. Make sure that you open your arms, that you open your homes, and that you give compassion to the people that are all around you, because we don't know the battles that people are fighting at this time. Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. What she said as far as the holidays, it's so true, and just best wishes for everyone. Some of us have fractured holidays, and we're in the middle of them too, and so people will come and go, and some will be stressful because it's the first holiday without someone, or wishing somebody was someplace else. And yeah, that sensitivity makes a difference. We'll all hopefully do what we can, and I have the best wishes for everyone. And for us, as we transition out, this has been quite a year. We've once again had those intense discussions, some of them prolonged, but have gone ahead and made some pretty bold steps, both as a council, in the committees, and the work that all of us are doing on the side as well, through JADO recently, for instance, a much debated position about whether to do the incentives, and we're already all getting emails ourselves from people who want to move to Topeka, and we've seen the press go all over the place, and who knew? So we'll keep doing that, I think. It's a great time to reflect on the challenges we've taken on and how well we've done, really. And to get some rest, get ready for next year. Thank you.
Councilor Ortiz.
Thank you. I first want to say to Mr. Jensen, I will continue your presence once in a while, so we won't miss you. To Mr. Cohen, I'll never forget that you played the guitar, and I'll always remember that. And Sandra's gone, and we will continue to fight the battle in Oakland, and also she wanted me to wish her husband, Randy Clara, happy birthday, so I wanted to do that. I wanted to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, and as Michelle said, there's a lot of kids hurting. There's a lot of families hurting in Topeka, and so if you see someone, bless them, because we're blessed. We're really blessed in our city, in our county. And then last but not least, my grandfather always taught me, if you're wrong, you apologize. Doug, I want to apologize to you. Can I see your eyes? I apologize. And I hope you will accept that. It really bothers me when I see staff, and not just you, just staff across the board, when we're talking, but I did want to apologize because I publicly said, shouted out you, and I wanted to publicly apologize to you.
Councilman Padilla.
Well, I just want to echo what everyone has said so far. First year for me on council was a whirlwind. Second year has been even more so. But I really feel engaged, and I feel that way because of my.
Mike the mic.
Well, look who's talking. Look who's talking. That's why you got the charcoal in your box. And that happens because working with my colleagues here, everybody seems to be willing to listen and cooperate and work collectively for the greater good of the community. I want to say thank you to City Manager and Doug, Lisa, Brenda, everyone else out there in the audience, the staff. It's got to be tough, I know, trying to meet all the needs of 9 people with different perspectives and bring all the answers the first time you come to that podium, because it just doesn't happen. So 10, well, the mayor, of course, you got to do that first. But my compliments to the staff for everything they do throughout the year. And for the officers who get the short stick and have to come and sit through all of this, I appreciate you sitting there, Mr. Johnson, and the chief as well. So I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and be safe out there. There's a lot of things that can happen in just a blink of an eye, so pay attention to what you're doing. Take care of yourselves and your family. Thank you.
Councilman Jensen.
I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. This has been quite a wild year for me. I took my little boy over to see our Christmas tree, and it was wild to see his eyes light up with excitement when he saw all those lights. Then he probably tried to eat them. So I have much to learn about this, but it's going to be a special Christmas for us, and I hope it's a special Christmas for all of you. Thank you.
Councilman Dobler.
Thanks. Couple things quickly. First of all, Merry Christmas. I've enjoyed my first month here. Hope everybody has great holidays and find some time for some downtime. That's important. I feel kind of bad. I was sitting here all night looking at Mr. Gerber and Mr. Trout in their nice purple ties, and I realized that, of course, the only major college in the state of Kansas to be playing in a bowl game in a couple of weeks, and I didn't wear my purple. So best of luck to the Wildcats. Thank you.
Send a photo. Councilman Cohen.
Mayor, I don't have anything other than just say Merry Christmas. Also, we do have an official meeting the first week of January, so this isn't it. But it has been a pleasure serving with you. So thank you.
Councilman Lesser.
Just a couple of things. First off, I want to remember yesterday was the anniversary of to Chief Cochran, David Grogan, and Jeff Apperly. So I want to share that for their families, that they are not forgotten, and we do appreciate what they have done. The only other thing I want to wish Councilman Emerson, who's homesick, he's texted me a couple times, he's homesick, he's watching. Want to wish him to get well. They do have penicillin for that, Tony, so. What? Science it. Merry Christmas.
Before we go, Tony, we love you. Get better soon. Before we go into the executive session, I wanted to recognize our friends from Shawnee County EMS that are back here today with us watching the meeting. So thank you for being here and keeping our community safe, city and county, on a regular basis. That being said, we do have the pleasure of some executive sessions this evening. So at this point in time, I would ask the city attorney to read the parameters.
The motion is to recess into executive session for a period of time not to exceed 15 minutes to discuss upcoming employer-employee negotiations as justified by KSA 75-4319B3. In order to aid the discussion, the following individuals should be present: members of the governing body, City Manager Brent Trout, Deputy City Manager Doug Gerber, Administrative and Financial Services Director Jessica Lamondola, Human Resources Director Jackie Russell, Planning and Development Director Bill Fyander, Deputy Administrative and Financial Services Director Nick Hawkins, and myself. No action is anticipated to be taken when the open meeting resumes in the governing body chambers.
We have heard the parameters of the executive session. What is the pleasure of the body?
So moved.
We have a motion for approval. Do we have a second? We have a second. We now proceed with the vote to enter into the session. Lisa, not to exceed how long?
15.
15.
We have 8 yes.
8 having voting yes. The motion carries. We will enter into executive session. No action is expected to be taken, and it is to not exceed 15 minutes. We will wait for the room to vacate before we proceed.
Mike.
We have concluded the executive session. No action has been taken. At this point in time, we need to reconvene for a second executive session. If the city attorney would please read the parameters.
The motion is to recess into executive session for a period of time not to exceed 30 minutes to discuss confidential employment matters pertaining to non-elected personnel as justified by KSA 75-4319B1 in order to protect the privacy of those discussed. To aid the discussion, the following individuals should be present: members of the governing body and Human Resources Director Jackie Russell. No action will be taken when the open meeting resumes in the governing body chambers.
Thank you for that. Do we have a motion? We have a motion by Councilman Dobler. We have a second by Councilman Jensen. All those in favor to go into executive session, not to exceed 30 minutes, raise your right hand. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We now recess into executive session for a period not to exceed 30 minutes. The executive session, no action has been taken. The meeting is now adjourned.